MasterAdvisor series. This is number 26, and today is March 4th. We have a great advisor lined up to talk to us about travel insurance today, but I just want to make a few announcements first. The first is that Speaker View is going to be the best experience for all attendees today, and that the chat box is open on your right. Please don't be shy in there. I know there are many advisors who have questions about travel insurance, and we're going to do our best to get to them today. So go ahead, drop them in there, and we'll do our best to take them as they come along. The next thing I want to announce is that we are going to be back in 2 weeks with episode 27. And for that session, I will be joined by two very special guests who I am very excited about. ASTA's Zane Kirby and ACTA's Wendy Paradis are going to be here. We're going to be talking about the importance of advocacy, what those associations are doing to secure the future of the trade, and we'll be answering any other questions you have as we go along. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to drop the link to the registration in chat, where because we do these on Zoom meetings, we do have a limit for attendees, and we have reached that limit before. And I know this next session is going to have high interest. So if you want to attend live, please register as soon as you can. For those of you who aren't able to attend live or want to revisit any of the previous sessions, you can go to our training page on Travel Market Report, or you can go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube page. We host all of our videos on our YouTube page, including some shorter clips from MasterAdvisor and other videos, like one from a panel of Apple Leisure Group execs that TMR was fortunate to be able to host in Cancun last week. We just got that video up. We appreciate any subscriptions to the channel or likes and comments on the videos. That helps us grow the audience here and gets more input from travel advisors like yourselves. So any interactions are greatly appreciated. And I'm going to drop the link in there. And it's www.youtube.com/travelmarketreport. So it's very easy to remember. Okay. So today's session is going to be all about travel insurance, which we know might not be the most exciting topic, but it might be the most important one we've tackled on these sessions. Before we're going to head, I want to make sure all attendees know that we won't be just dissecting specific products today, but instead we'll be talking about how travel advisors can sell travel insurance to their clients, why it's important more now than ever before to be able to effectively market it and present it in a digestible way. It's not an easy task, I know that, and that's why I'm very happy to have Kim Goldstein here today. She knows a lot about travel insurance. I'm very happy to welcome her to the show. I know she has a lot to talk about. And yeah, welcome, Kim. And thank you so much for lending us your time today.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and I want to jump right into it because I know we don't have an endless amount of time today, and I know a lot of questions are going to come in. So the first question I want to ask you is sort of a basic one, and COVID has, of course, been the answer to this. But I want to ask you to give it to us in your own words. Why is travel insurance such an important thing to be able to sell to clients as a travel advisor now and also before COVID has sort of taken over the world?
I think the most important thing is travel insurance is one of those mysteries to clients. And, they can go online and look up hotels and read reviews. But when it comes to travel insurance, they don't really know anything about it. And as a travel advisor, you can really show your value when you can start to sell the product to them, very low key and just kind of mentioning the importance of, hey, what happens if you slip and fall at the resort or you get stranded overnight in Atlanta? Those are things they don't necessarily anticipate, and they don't necessarily know how to handle them or how to pay for them. And that's where you can really show your value and the value of the travel insurance.
Yeah, that is a great point. Because I know there's a monetary element to travel advisors being able to sell travel insurance, but showing your value again, which is something we talk about a lot on Travel Market Report, I think is an important element to remember. Is that it is not I mentioned that it might not be the most exciting topic, which is true, but it's also probably one of the topics that takes the most knowledge to be able to sort of properly pair and properly be able to sell to your clients. We just have a poll question. So let's talk about sort of the process as you're presenting travel insurance to your clients. Again, it's something that can be super overwhelming. So being able to do it properly and doing it in a decisive manner, I think, is important. I want to ask you what your process is for qualifying your clients to be able to know what you need to know to be able to pair them with the right coverage when they're going on a trip.
Um, it's funny, they almost kind of qualify themselves. When I'm doing a sales consultation, they're going to start telling you all their concerns with the trip, whether it's financial or they're trying to get pregnant or whatever the case may be. So it's funny, like I don't even have to ask them that many questions around the travel insurance. They tend to volunteer those details to me, and that helps me ensure that I'm offering the best type of insurance for them. And it can be kind of cookie cutter, but on the flip side, sometimes they'll say things and I'm like, oh, what I normally offer is not going to be the best product for them. I need to offer something else. So it's really just listening to what they're saying and all the cues that they're telling me, because a lot of the questions that I would need to ask them to find out what their concerns are. I don't want to cross that line of,
Yeah.
hey, I shouldn't ask you about health related questions or things like that. So they tend to tell me.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, but I did accidentally close the poll. I see people in the chat worried about it. We're gonna go and reopen the poll, and I'll let one of our teammates at TMR do that, and I won't touch it. I promise. But you mentioned details that they volunteer, and again, I know we don't want to get specific about health issues, but what kind of details would make it easy for you to pair them to be able to sort of present the proper travel insurance to your clients?
The ones that I hear the most are my grandma is older, or someone has cancer, or I'm trying to get pregnant, or things like that. Those are usually the things that I hear the most from people. Or they'll come up with, if it's getting near hurricane season, or they're traveling, they're getting married in October and they're aware that's hurricane season, that will sometimes come up as well. So those are usually the big ones. And every once in a while, you'll get something totally random and strange, but those are the ones you hear most of the time.
I'm curious. I asked you this earlier in the week, but I'm curious again. I mean, in your career as a travel advisor, was there ever an aha moment when you were selling travel insurance? I mean, or was it something that it's always been a part of your sales process?
I feel like it's always been part of my sales process. However, as I've learned it more thoroughly, and I guess as the world has also changed,
Yeah.
it's become more and more prominent. As an agency, my team has been great about trying to figure out how to best interject it in the process and where it makes the most sense. Because if you kind of do it on the tail end, you're not going to have as many people select insurance. So as a team, we work together to try to figure out how can we best put it in our process and make it the most effective so our clients will actually purchase it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And those are the poll results. So 84% of the people on this call today do sell travel insurance, and we have 16% who do not market it to every single client, which I think is a missed opportunity. And hopefully this session will prove that to the 16% who isn't marketing it actively to their clients. But I do want to, you mentioned your process, and I think that is one point I do want to focus on today is, at what point in the sales process are you bringing up travel insurance to your clients? And I mean, we mentioned sort of where you put it as you're presenting the bottom line to your clients when they're booking vacations, like things like that. And I'm hoping you could give us some of your wisdom on that kind of process.
Sure. So I do a sales consultation with every client that wants a quote from me. And it typically comes up in that conversation again, like they just will start asking questions that lead to travel insurance. And right now, most of the time, it has to do with, well, what happens if the resort is closed due to COVID? Or what happens if I don't want to travel due to COVID? And then I can go into my whole insurance spiel at that point. Then on our reservation form, one of the questions is, do you want travel insurance? And honestly, whether or not they pick yes or no, we still always provide an insurance quote to them. We do that prior to actually placing any payments on the booking, because I want them to see the quote. I send it if I'm doing third party insurance, I send it from the website of that company, and they can see the entire policy, because I want them to know what they're buying. And for many reasons, but probably more so for me, so that they don't come back and say, well, I didn't know that that insurance didn't cover such and such, because as we know, there's a lot of exclusions with any type of insurance. And like with health insurance, people just think, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor and everything's paid for. And we all know that's not the case. And it's the same thing with travel insurance. So it's really important for them to see that policy up front before they purchase. If they have selected that they want insurance when they fill out their reservation form, I go ahead and I send them the quote, but I include it on the invoice. So I'll have the hotel, the air, the transfers, and then I have a section for the travel insurance and put the cost right in there and send them the quotes so they can see it. So they're getting it right up front before any payments are made.
Yeah, I mean that did jump out to me when we spoke on Tuesday, is that where you place it in the sales process seems to be impactful for you closing that sale. And we do have a comment in the chat. Christine says before I close the conversation, I strongly suggest insurance, and she said 95% of her clients do take it. And is that sort of the rate you experience with your clients, is 99 to 95%, or is it different?
I'm maybe not quite that high. With a lot of groups, sometimes if it's a destination wedding, sometimes those guests are not as into insurance as they should be. But I would say, especially now, we have a very high closure rate and people aren't even flinching. Like, it doesn't matter what the policy costs. One I sold this week, I think I mentioned to you earlier, was two people. It was $800. They were older and they had an expensive room, but they just didn't even flinch and bought that insurance. So I think that's been one positive out of COVID, is people are really taking it. And one of the things I say to them is, I purchase it for every trip I take. And I'm now on an annual policy, which makes my life a lot easier. But years ago, I'm pretty sure I was my biggest insurance client, because I would purchase an individual policy for every single trip, fam, whatever, I would buy insurance. So when I tell them that, it definitely gives some validity to it too. They're like, oh, if you're purchasing it, I should too.
Yeah, and again, I think that is a good point. I mean, COVID has changed a lot, and it's made a super negative impact, of course, in a lot of aspects of life. But I think it has sort of put the spotlight on how important travel insurance is. And I'm curious. I mean, for the percentage of your clients, Kim, who have and who opt not to buy travel insurance, what are their biggest hangups on sort of making that purchase or adding that to their booking?
Well, it's usually always money. So
Yeah.
that's going to be the first thing. They will also sometimes say, oh, I have it on my credit card. And, then I'll say, hey, you might want to compare the coverage, because it's not always apples to apples. And we all know it's definitely not. But so I'll always suggest that as well. But I mean, I think money is the biggest thing. And the other thing is, especially again, with a lot of my groups clients, they just think the resorts are going to refund them. Like, oh, I don't want to go. The resort's going to give me my money back. And of course, we do a lot of education on that. And we have a lot of disclosures, but in their mind, that's what they think is going to happen.
Yeah. So I see a lot of comments coming in about policies and things like that, and travel insurance providers. And I don't think we're going to tackle any of them today. I do know there's a ton of great insurance companies out there, so I would sort of direct your questions toward their BDMs, because there's just so much to know about these policies, which makes it difficult for anyone, who's not directly involved in it to recommend it. But I did want to address that. So we have a question, and I'm curious if you can answer this, Kim. Christina Beckman wants to know if you add a disclaimer on lack of COVID inclusions when you're presenting travel insurance to your clients now, just because she says people assume that it is covered.
They do, that's for sure, because again, they think everything under the sun is covered. So when I'm talking to them, I definitely mention it, and I tell them how the insurance company that I work with handles it, because at the beginning, it definitely was an exclusion and there's some changes being made. So I think we'll see a very positive uptick, that a lot of the third-party insurance is going to start to cover it more, and you'll actually see it in the terms, which will be nice. But yes, we do have a disclaimer, and we make it very clear that COVID, and you get into a lot of things with COVID. Is it fear of COVID, or is it that you actually have COVID and you can't travel? So there is a big difference there. So it's, we've worked with some travel lawyers since COVID started and updated our terms to try to make sure they're very locked down.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned to me earlier in the week that some of the disclaimers you were reading when you were in, I guess, pre-COVID travel insurance, the word pandemic and epidemic were specifically mentioned as not events, non-covered events. And I thought that was interesting, that sort of what has turned the world upside down the last 12 months, it was specifically in the travel insurance language.
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's always been in there. But, as I've said 100 times to my clients that booked prior to COVID, who would have ever thought we would have been in a pandemic and dealing with this? So I think that's where a lot of the insurance companies, whether it's the tour ops or the third party, have really pivoted and stepped up, and they understand that, hey, we've got to cover this because people need this coverage and they're not going to buy it if COVID is not covered. So they've done a really good job of trying to tweak the policy and make it work for us.
Yeah, everyone had to shift their business, as we have another poll question going up, and the travel insurance companies are no different. Let me minimize this, making sure I don't close it again. So we have a few more questions in the chat. So Melinda wants to know. She says it is tricky knowing how to word things. I guess she's talking about your sales process. She says we can't require insurance. We have to offer it, but we have to be careful in how we say we recommend it. Do you have any thoughts on that? And is that something you've experienced in your relationship with your clients and with your suppliers?
Yeah, you do have to be really careful, and you can't just throw it in on the invoice legally. So I kind of will just, I'll tell them that I highly recommend it, and I always take it for myself. And then the one thing I always say is it's the one part of your package that I want you to purchase and not use. Everything else I want you to use, but this one piece, I don't want you to. I'm hoping that everything goes smoothly, and it's a little bit of Murphy's Law. If you don't buy it, you're going to need it. And if you do buy it, hopefully you don't need it. So that's how I kind of get around it a little.
I do want to ask, and look, so obviously the attendees also think that COVID has impact clients' willingness to purchase travel insurance, which I want to, 75% have said it has, and only 2% says it's negatively impacted it. But in terms of the other end of this, Kim, aside from protecting your clients, which is of course very important, how has selling travel insurance and your ability to successfully do so impacted your agency's profitability or your bottom line? Is it a big part of sort of your commission payments?
Well, prior to COVID, honestly, like it just kind of got meshed in with everything else. And I always knew that statement was coming once a month, but it didn't stand out as much. But over the last year, which yes, it's been a year now, those payments each month really stood out because I sell a lot of it. My team is great at selling it as well. So we were actually getting some pretty nice commission checks because with third-party insurance, you actually get paid usually about a month and a half after you purchase it, not after travel. So we were selling quite a bit of it and we were getting paid for it. So it was actually a nice paycheck coming in when things were looking a little sparse for a few months.
Yeah, that is a good point. The payment schedule. I know suppliers. That's a sort of a thorn in the side for a lot of advisors is when they're going to get paid if they make a booking. They have to wait till their client travels. But insurance companies, again, it might depend on the supplier, but they do offer a bit of a quicker payment, and that could help you, especially during these kind of times.
Right. No, I felt like a gold mine coming in for a while.
So I want to talk about education because we do have a ton of questions coming in about specific specific supplier policies and specific insurance company policies. And again, I don't want to address any of them or recommend any policies because I know that's sort of getting down a rabbit hole. But I want to ask about education because I think that's what advisors need to have when they're presenting these products. How did you become educated on the products that I know you offer a lot of Allianz to your clients, and how did you become familiar with their products, and how did you build a relationship with the people at Allianz?
They have a specialist certification program. I took that, and honestly, we've used them for years, even before they were Allianz. I was laughing in my contacts. I had some names back from many company names ago from them, but they've just been really good partners, and they will always help train. They've come in and done training with my whole team, and I think any of the companies will do that. They're our partners and they want us to know the product, but it's really just kind of digging in and making the phone call. And, you just have to keep picking up the phone and calling and asking the questions, and that's how you learn it. And with any product that we sell in travel, it changes all the time. So you have to, it's like with COVID, we had to kind of wipe our slates clean and start fresh because a lot of the policies have changed. So it's just been a constant focus for us. And for me personally, I like to focus on one thing. And if I use too many policies, it gets confusing because a lot of the companies are very different. So we've just really honed in and learned this one product pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, it seems overwhelming. Which again, what we spoke about earlier, it's more overwhelming for your clients than it is for you. So having that to be able to add as an added value to those relationships, I think is super important. And I see questions coming in about third party versus vendor travel insurance, but and we will get to that. But one question that came in that I thought was a good question came in from Jennifer Walker. She asks, out of curiosity, do you assist your clients in starting a claim with the insurance company?
Generally, no. I like to stay out of that part as much as possible. Now, I do provide them the minute they say they need to, let's say they're canceling. If they're canceling, I will immediately, before I process any cancellation, I will send myself an invoice as the booking is from, whatever company I booked it with. So I've got a pre-cancellation invoice. I process the cancellation, and then we'll send them, I'll send the client any documentation that they need, which is generally an invoice. And in our database, I have the ability to go in and make comments. So I can say like $200 was non-refundable because that's what the insurance company needs to see. So I can note that on there so that the invoice is workable for the client. So I do provide them that, but as far as actually filling out the claim, no, I don't get involved with that. And I believe sometimes you can really kind of cross the line with some HIPAA stuff. And sometimes the clients don't even tell me why they're canceling. So I don't ask if they don't tell me. So I just let them go, and I do follow up and get the claim number and kind of keep an eye on it. One, because I want to make sure it's taken care of, but two, not more importantly, but equally as important, I want to ensure that I can get commission protection if it is available. So if their claim is approved, I generally can get paid my commission as well.
Yeah, and again, I think the HIPAA thing is important to know about because again, it's way different than knowing where your client likes to go on spring break. The travel insurance details. And you mentioned earlier in this conversation about a travel lawyer, and I'm just curious if you want to touch on like what kind of a role does having whatever kind of relationship you have with the travel lawyer, what kind of role does that have with you selling travel insurance and also selling any kind of travel?
It's really just more so we want to make sure that our terms are written the way they need to, our invoice terms and things like that. Everything got a lot more legal when COVID came around. So we just worked with an attorney to ensure that everything we have is locked down, as far as our database and our terms with that. And we also started using within our database, there's an invoice approval system where I can have 3 blocks and I can put like, if you do not purchase travel insurance, this is non-refundable, and they have to initial it or check it and then sign it. So it's a little bit more in their face. Like, we all know that we can put stuff in our terms and kind of bury them, but there are a lot of things that I want to make sure that the clients can see and it's very obvious to them. And those are the type things like I want them to know, if you don't purchase insurance, it is non-refundable. And sometimes it is, but we want to just cover ourselves. So
Yeah, and
that's
we did a few weeks ago, we did do a session with a travel lawyer, and we didn't talk about insurance, but we did talk about terms and conditions. If anyone wants to watch that, that was with Tom Carpenter, and that's on our training page and on our YouTube page. But I do want to get back to what I just mentioned, Kim, was that the difference between supplier insurance or third party insurance. Can you lend us your sort of knowledge on that? I mean, what's the difference, and then why do you choose one over the other?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely pros and cons to both, and there's not a perfect answer. I just, over the years, like I said, I've kind of focused on one product so I can learn it well. But there are definitely times when I use supplier insurance. One, it's very easy. I click a button and boom, it's done. And I don't have to go to another system and process anything. So that's a huge benefit. It's also very easy to cancel and get the refund on supplier insurance. And not that it's difficult on the other side, it's just, it's a few more steps involved. So, there's definitely pros in that. And then there's always some states that are trouble. And so we find if it's one of those states, and those states do change, but it is typically New York is
Yeah, you
always the
mentioned New
culprit.
York earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
They're just, yeah. So a lot of times if our client is from New York, I will use the supplier insurance versus third party. So it depends on the situation and what it is. Prior to COVID, I did not use a lot of cancel anytime because every time I used it, my clients would cancel anytime. So
Okay.
that didn't work so well for my model. I like them to have a little skin in the game, first of all. But since COVID, I mean, I think, this is a situation where our team has really had to adjust, and we've started using it a little bit more. We use a regular policy with cancel anytime. And then sometimes I just use the suppliers cancel anytime. And it's just dependent on the situation.
Yeah, and I mean, just hearing you talk about it, there does seem to be a ton to wrap your head around. And a lot of advisors are looking for sort of the best way to get educated, which you mentioned before is probably certification programs from the travel insurance companies. And I'm trying to keep up with the questions. I know a lot are coming in, which is great to see. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic. So Kim, I asked you earlier in the week, and I want to see if you if you could tell us any stories where you sort of, I guess it wasn't an aha moment for you, but a story that would sort of prove the value of being able to sell travel insurance, not only for your bottom line, but for the best relationships you can have with your clients. Are there any anecdotes or any things you can think of that might want to pass along?
Yeah, I think some of them I've probably blocked from memory over the years, but I think the one that right before COVID, I had this run of, I do a lot of family travel, and I had a lot of multi-generational travel. So the grandparents were taking the whole family, on nice trips to nice resorts. One of them that stands out, it was a $72,000 trip to Beaches Turks, and grandma got sick and the entire family had to cancel. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a huge booking to lose. But thankfully, with the travel protection that I'd offered them, they were covered. And that also meant that I got my entire $9,000 commission paid, which was very nice, because at that point I had done all the work. I mean, they
Yeah.
were close to travel. And I had a run of those. Actually, I was like, gosh, every time I book a multi-generational family, the grandparent gets sick and cancels. And that is definitely not how I wanted to turn out, but was thankful that I had, that they had bought the insurance, and it was, the insurance was expensive and they invested. There's also a situation, this was not a client of mine, but it is someone I know. And this is kind of interesting. They went to Thailand, a young guy, and it was a very inexpensive trip. He was in his 20s and he got in an accident on a tour, and like a bad accident, like they weren't sure if he was going to make it. And he was hospitalized for weeks. And so, of course, people start calling me because I know him. Can you help? And I'm like, well, didn't book the trip with me, so I can't help. And of course, the first words out of my mouth, does he have travel insurance? And the answer was no. And I was like, oh boy, we are in trouble now. So he was in the hospital for weeks because he couldn't afford to be medvaced back to Richmond, and had to stay. They had to wait till he was able to travel back on a regular commercial flight, had to hire a nurse to travel with him, had to be in first class, and also had to have a family member fly to Thailand and fly back with him. So, as you can imagine, that was a very large expense. The family had to go raise money on GoFundMe, over $32,000 just to get him home. And I'm thinking, wow, if he had purchased what probably would have been less than a $200 policy because he was young and the trip was cheap, he would have had most of that taken care of. It was mind boggling.
Yeah,
So,
that is for anyone looking to if for anyone on the fence, if any clients on the fence about travel insurance, I think that story would prove just how valuable it is. Which is something I want to talk about. So we have about 20 minutes left. Again, I know the questions are coming in pretty fast. I'm gonna do my best to keep up with them as we have another poll up. Myrna does say that stories do help sell travel insurance, so I think that's also important to know. I want to also, Kim, give you the chance. I mean, are there any other selling techniques? We spoke about that you do have a high conversion rate with travel insurance. And the biggest hangup seems to be those value bookers. But I mean, are there any other selling techniques that you have, or any tips you could share with people on the call about sort of selling travel insurance or converting people to travel insurance bookers who maybe hadn't considered it beforehand?
yeah, a couple of the things that we do, when we're using our third party insurance, they do have a follow up system. So when I set up a quote on their system and put the client's email, and it will ask if I want to have it do follow up for me, which is fabulous. Yes, anyone who wants to do some of my work for me, you can have it. So they will periodically, it's not too often, but they will periodically send the clients an email if they don't select travel insurance, and remind them of the importance of it. And sometimes the clients do, cave. And I find the things that actually really help, if there's a hurricane looming out there, then all of a sudden everybody decides they want travel insurance. But at that point it's a little late. But so that's one thing that's been helpful. We also integrated in our process, our database will send automated emails as well. So every client of mine that does not select insurance, they're also going to get an email from me, just reminding them. It looks more handwritten versus like a MailChimp type thing. So it just reminds them of the importance, and hey, it's not too late, let's do this. So I would say those are the things that have been really effective for us. And when you're talking to clients, definitely sharing these stories, reminding them that a lot of their insurance that they have for health insurance may not work out of the US, and that's a big surprise to a lot of people. So they'll quickly buy travel insurance when you hear that. And I think too, one of the things is they always think of the big things, the hurricanes and, someone passing away, but they don't think about, I'm in a destination, I'm doing things that I wouldn't normally do. I'm doing tours and zip lining and things like that. And, people slip, people fall, they hurt themselves. So just trying to remind them of those things. And, I think too, when I say to them, you should hear some of the stories that I hear all the time from my clients. I mean, it kind of scares them. And I'm not trying to scare my clients. I'm just trying to be really realistic. And most of my clients that know me well know I'm going to be very open and honest and realistic. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, I think that is a great tip too, is just reminding them. I think, again, I don't think I trust I trust Kim's advice, but again, what we spoke about earlier in the week, Kim, and we wanted to emphasize is that it's not a one size fit all for travel insurance. Is that people have to figure out their own routine and their own techniques, and they have to sort of qualify their clients correctly to figure out what kind of coverage they best need to. Um, okay. So I see more and more questions coming in. And I see a lot of policy questions again that I do not want to address right now. So I'll leave that to the chat. But a survey came into my email inbox earlier in this week that I thought was interesting just because we were having this conversation today. And it was the top questions that another travel insurance company received from their clients when they get asked about coverage, especially with COVID as sort of the big impending force now. And I'm curious if I was going to ask you, Kim, and as your client, and I'm curious sort of what your answers would be to these questions. And the first one, I guess, is, and I'm sure a lot of the advisors in the chat have the same experiences. People want to know what happens if I get COVID-19 during my trip. And if a client asks you that, what would you tell them?
So that's a very loaded question these days. There's so many scenarios that they run into, and it does depend on the insurance policy. So, first and foremost, you need to know what you're selling them. But most importantly, most of the travel advisors out there are not licensed to sell insurance technically. So I have no problems telling my clients when they start asking me very technical questions, even if I know the answer, I'm going to actually refer them to the insurance company, and I will say, we're not licensed to sell insurance. We're going to leave it to the professionals and direct them to them so that, because again, policies change and we don't always know about that. So to answer the question right now, the insurance companies that I'm using, they are covering if you actually have COVID. And again, that was an exclusion in their policy before, but we're starting to see some changing with that. So I think you'll start to see that your clients will be covered if they do get COVID in destination. Just be really careful with the quarantine aspect of it, because some of the policies do have coverage. Some of the resorts are offering coverage, but it's not always the whole amount, and it's not always the entire time. And then you also have to get into, if I'm traveling with my family and I get it, what happens if the rest of my family tests negative? Are they covered? So those are some really technical questions that you want the clients to ask the insurance company.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mean, I guess it's sort of a nature of the industry, but that policies keep changing. But I mean, do you have any insight in on that? I mean, how fluid truly are travel insurance policies? And you as an advisor, how do you keep up with sort of the changes in the policies and what's happening and when?
Um, Before COVID, they changed, but not like they've changed this year. I feel like when COVID happened, it was like we all got a clean slate and everything changed with everything. So you kind of had to relearn. Some days I felt like I was a brand new travel advisor, even though I've done this for years. It's really just reading the emails and periodically just pulling the policies and comparing them. And I think that our travel insurance companies, our tour ops, and even travel media, you guys do a really good job of keeping us in the loop of changes. And some days I feel like my promo email inbox is overflowing, but it is so important to read those things from from the media, from the different companies, because there's a lot of really important updates. And I definitely don't see it all and don't know all the changes, but you just have to kind of dig in and pay attention to it.
Yeah, again, it is a huge task. Again, something that provides you value for your client. I think as more and more people want to book with advisors, I think that's something they're going to have in their heads, is that they don't want to read all those terms and conditions, and they certainly don't want to be spending nights researching travel insurance companies when could be researching where they want to spend their time and spend their money. We do have another question, and you mentioned you covered this earlier, Kim, but this Diana might have come in a little late. She wants to know, how do you deal with clients from New York? Because I guess she has the same issues you've had.
Well, I mean, technically I can book them with Allianz. I just don't get paid for them. So I prefer to get paid for my work. So those are usually, like, I have a wedding group right now that I have booked with Travel Impressions. So their CFAR is actually really good. So they've really stepped up their game as far as adding coverage. And I know a lot of the other companies have too. It's just this particular group I know because they're from New York. So I've been using their CFAR for that group so I can get paid for it. But yeah, there's a lot of little exclusions, and it takes some phone calls and making sure I'm booking it in the right place. But again, if I can book it and get paid for it, that's even better. So.
Yeah, exactly. And are there any other states that are typically trouble states for you with travel insurance, or is it particularly New York?
Texas can be. I learned something new about Texas recently. I believe it was Texas. Now I have to go back and look at my notes at some point. But that if you had an unmarried couple, you could actually not insure them on the same policy, because in many states, as long as you lived in the same household, you could insure on the same policy. And we just kind of stumbled across it because the system wasn't working, and we had to make a call to actually book the policy. And they're like, oh no, you have to do a separate policy. So that was one I kind of learned in a roundabout way. And at the end of the day, they said it probably would have been fine if we'd gotten them on the same policy. It really probably was not a big deal, but it's just better to break them out.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I mean, again, like I mentioned earlier, we didn't want to talk about products today just because of how I don't even know what the word would be, but how difficult they would be to understand, or how comprehensive you really need the amount of time you need to dedicate to sort of understand these products, I think is a big task for advisors. And I mean that Texas rule is definitely something to consider on that thought line. I was going to say, so I mean, you mentioned sort of pointing people in direction of your preferred supplier when it comes to travel insurance. And I'm curious, I mean, how has it been sort of building a relationship with BDMs at an insurance company, or with representatives from an insurance company? How has that been? Do you have any tips about advisors reaching out to BDMs and sort of starting a relationship, or anything else you think would be important to know when people want to start selling travel insurance?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been pretty easy. If any of you work with a consortia, a lot of times they have preferred companies, insurance companies they work with. So that's a great place to start. And I mean, I think a lot of the insurance companies are really out there. I get calls all the time or emails from, hey, can we set up a meeting? So you might have to make that initial phone call and, try to connect, but they've been great in working with us and answering questions. And I mean, you're never going to know everything. And there's so many little rules that it just kind of blows your mind sometimes, but you just get in and do the best you can do. But they've been really good about helping us and it's just answering questions. You just have to ask the questions, and they will help guide you through and get you the right answer. So I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I see some suppliers in the chat, and I mean, suppliers want to be involved in your business too. So I mean, it does work both ways, that you're going to make commission, and they want to be the best partners they can be for you too. And again, using your consortia and your hosts, I think is a great tip. And a lot of advisors moving forward I think will tackle the insurance companies with that tip in mind. So we have about 5 minutes left. If anyone else has any outstanding questions, please drop them in the chat. For anyone who came in halfway, again, we'll have the whole video up on our YouTube page and our training page later today. But Kim, I want to give you a couple minutes, or however long, to if you think we've missed anything today, or if you think you want to add anything to the conversation about travel insurance, or about anything when it comes to running a travel agency in today's sort of day and age.
I think the biggest thing is insurance is daunting. And I know everyone on my team, we're always asking each other questions, and, don't be scared of it. You don't have to know everything everywhere. Just pick one or two policies that you can kind of learn and really focus on. And honestly, the policies that I use when I'm doing third party, I pretty much use the exact same policy for everything. So it's not like I have to know 75 different products. I just use either a standard policy or a standard with cancel anytime. So that makes it very simple, and just try to learn them as best as you can. You don't need to sit there and read 30 pages of terms and agreements, but work with your your suppliers and ask them questions and find out, what are the things that most of their clients are asking them, because that's what your clients are going to ask you. So just get in there and learn it. People are buying it like crazy right now. So if you're not offering it on every transaction, I definitely recommend doing it. And again, it shows your value, because they don't really know how to do that or where to purchase travel insurance from. So, get out there and offer it every time. And if they start asking you the questions that you don't know the answers to, then refer them to the company. Just say, I want to make sure that, you get all the answers, and we can't really go through medical info with you. So contact them and they can assist you. So that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to round up today. But I think we do have a good point brought up by Lisa in the chat. She wants to know, how do you approach clients that don't want to purchase insurance at deposit, since the suppliers have made the terms and conditions so flexible now? Which is, I never thought about that, because we've sort of applauded suppliers who have made it easy to cancel and rebook. And I'm curious, how has that impacted your conversations with travel insurance? You talk about sort of the success you've had over the last 12 months, but has that impacted it at all, how flexible these suppliers have been?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the clients will ask that usually sometimes at the time of sale, but honestly, all of our invoicing basically says once you place a deposit, it's non-refundable. And once you place a final payment, it's non-refundable, and they have to check the box and initial it.
Yeah.
So they're agreeing to those terms, and they're very much in the forefront. They're not buried in my terms and agreements. And for some reason, I don't really know why, they don't question that too much. I'm not saying it never happens, because it definitely does sometimes. It's usually later on in the process that they'll come back to me and they're like, oh, I saw that so-and-so now allows you to cancel. I was actually working on a group today where the hotel now allows them to cancel up to 14 days before travel. So I find with me, for some reason, they just don't realize it until later on in the process. So
Well,
I get
maybe
lucky.
they probably trust you, and I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. Like, being a successful travel advisor is not easy. And we have another comment from Janet, who says she stresses the importance of the during travel benefits. She says these expenses can run into tens of thousands of dollars and are unknown. She says, I ask my clients if they can afford the worst if it happens.
And I think that's a really good point. A lot of people don't realize when you're out of the US, if you have to go to the hospital, it's not like the US where you just give them your insurance card and you leave. They actually want you to pay them right there on the spot. And most clients are not walking around with, $10,000 in their back pocket. Well, hopefully they're not. But so that's really important too. I know a lot of the insurance companies, if a client is hospitalized, they can wire the money over so that the client doesn't have to pay for it out of pocket. And that's also one thing with the quarantine stuff. You need to be really careful, because if your clients are quarantined, they need to be prepared to pay for that out of pocket to the hotel. And then when they get back, they file a claim with the travel insurance company. So it's not like the travel insurance company is just sending money over to the hotel. So that's one thing just to kind of be careful not to get tripped up in, and make sure your clients know that if they're questioning it.
Yeah, and I know there are some suppliers who are covering the quarantine, I think. I mean, there are some resorts that are covering the quarantine, but it is a good point to remember, is that you're gonna have to pay up front and hope to get reimbursed on the latter half.
Right. So, and most of the third party, they want you to come back from travel and then file your claim in case you have multiple issues, which does happen sometimes. So
I mean, I'm also curious, I mean, you might not have a sense of this, but what is the turnaround time on a travel insurance claim? Do you have any idea of what that typically is?
for all my clients, it's actually been very fast. I would say 2 weeks or less,
Oh,
assuming, and this is the big assumption, they provide the paperwork that they need to provide. Sometimes the clients will get frustrated and I try to help them through, and I'm like, well, you haven't provided ABC that the company has required. And I do think sometimes the travel insurance companies ask us for things that are very challenging to provide. Like they'll say, we need a letter from the airline saying the flight was delayed. Well, we all know the airline is not going to give us a letter. So I tell my clients, if your flight's delayed, screenshot your phone where it says delayed, anything like that. And at the end of the day, they can go back in their system and pull it and they know, but sometimes they'll ask for things that are a little more challenging for the client to provide. And I've seen some positive change with that. So I think that's getting better, but that is definitely something to keep your eye on.
Okay. Well, I hope we covered the most we can cover today. Again, I know things aren't one size fit all for anyone, and policies and protocols are probably better asked to travel insurance companies than to us. But I really do appreciate your time, Kim. You've given us a lot to think about, and I think you've given a lot of advice to a lot of advisors who are themselves overwhelmed by travel insurance. So thank you so much for this hour today. I really do appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And again, we really appreciate the entire travel media and TMR because you guys have kept us informed throughout this whole thing. And I think that's one of the things I've changed. I go in and actually read all those emails from start to finish because it is such valuable info and there's been information overload since COVID started. And I think that's one big change I've made for myself is like, all right, I need to really dig in and read these emails because they are providing info that I don't always have at my fingertips. So thank you.
Well, thank you again. And for anyone who only caught the second half or came in late, we're gonna have the full session on the YouTube later today. And please come back in 2 weeks when we have Zane Kirby from ASA and Wendy Paradis from ACTA, and we'll be taking questions then too. So thank you for everyone for attending. Thank you, Kim, again for lending us your expertise today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.